Okay, we're back.
We are.
Episode 4.
Yes.
Rigor and Flow.
Absolutely.
With
myself, Aiwan.
And myself, Tamanda.
That's correct.
Correct. It's the show where
business meets love.
And culture meets critique.
Ooh,
I love it.
The other way around.
We did.
It was nice.
I like it. Kept us on our toes.
Oh, and keeps them on their toes too.
Yes.
Everybody has to be on their toes.
Absolutely.
In this Donald Trump era.
Do you know what I can't wait for is when we no longer have to introduce our show because people know who we are.
Yeah, or we just have some music that just goes Rigor and Flow with Aiwan and Tamanda.
Rigor and Flow with Aiwan and Tamanda. There we go.
Maybe that's
our theme tune. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Roots and rigor, rigor and flow. Rigor and flow.
One. So today's episode for me is a difficult one. I experienced a lot of discomfort with this one, both from the development stage all the way through till now. There is a chance that this episode doesn't go out, if I'm being honest. So if you, the audience, are watching this and listening to this, it means that it went out. And if you're not, then it was in our personal archives, never to be seen ever again.
Yeah, it's gonna be an interesting topic to go into with you, partly because this thing is still live.
Yeah, so the topic today is on fertility and the queer LGBTQ plus baby tax. And
I would say the black queer baby tax because
absolutely,
there are specific challenges for black queer couples.
Absolutely, and we're going to go into some of that. It's a difficult one.
It is. What do you... I do have some difficulties with this one as well, but I'm like, what is it that you feel most concerned about in terms of talking about this?
Well, there's two main things for me. Number one is that the family that I came up in and the community and culture that I came up in was very much, you do not air your dirty laundry or even your clean laundry out in the open.
Yeah.
That stuff stays in the house to be dealt with internally. And so there's a bit of a discomfort in talking about this very, very personal, very intimate part of our journey together as a couple in the public domain. I think that's also part of the reason why I've always had some problems with social media, because it's very much a put your private stuff in the public. Yeah. And I sometimes struggle with it quite a lot. So that's the first thing.
Or at least your private highlights.
Yeah, your private highlights, it's always, very curated.
Yeah.
The second thing for me is that I feel a little bit of shame and embarrassment about this, because I think this is something I really wanted with you, want with you. And it's the first time in my life that I felt that. And then to go for it and not be able to achieve it feels maybe a bit embarrassing. So I think maybe there's things tied up in that, maybe like a failure within myself to do something at the right time, and maybe you've messed up or something like that. But there's definitely a bit of embarrassment, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Wow, that's not really something you've articulated to me, that you feel. It sounds like you're saying almost like you did something wrong. Yeah,
I think so, a little bit. I can't explain it. It's just a very interesting mix of feelings whenever I think about this particular topic. And I think maybe I'm still trying to understand what's going on internally. But those are two feelings that I can definitely put a finger on.
I feel like my concerns talking about this come from a slightly different place. And I have to say that if you were going to say anybody should feel at fault, you'd think it would be more me.
Why?
Since some of the struggles that we had in terms of the journey were related directly to my own body in some ways, right? Mm-hmm. So it's interesting that you've taken that on, because I guess I would have thought if either of us was feeling those things, it would be me. And I don't feel that way. So maybe it's because I've had so much affirmation from you. I'm not really sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you don't feel that way, because I wouldn't want you to feel what I'm feeling. That would be really horrible.
Yeah, but I don't want you to feel what you're feeling.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. It really is.
Okay. So what I want to know is, how did you learn about sex and making babies?
The way that I was taught about sex and making babies, there's two parts.
Yeah.
There's what my elders taught me.
In the church?
In the church.
Okay.
Yeah. And I guess in my family home as well, like culturally, which is just don't have sex before marriage. And the biblical word was fornicate. Don't fornicate.
Yeah.
End of story. Keep your legs closed.
Okay.
And that's what they left you with.
Right.
The idea being that you're supposed to miraculously then know how to have sexual relations, understand your bodily pleasures and what makes you feel good and so on and so forth at the point that you get married, which led to difficulties for some couples getting married, you know.
In your church?
In our church,
Yeah.
yeah. And struggling to really find that sexual connection. I'm not saying everyone, but
Did
it was
people
certainly
talk
a problem.
about that?
It would come up in some of my mum's discussions with some of the women in her
Really?
fellowship. So there was that part. And then the other part was what the Bible says about it. So we grew up reading the King James version of the Bible, which is a very old version of the Bible. It uses a lot of archaic language.
Yeah.
And there are a few ways that the Bible spoke about sex. And it would be, so let's just take, for example, Jacob in the Bible. It would use words like, you know, Jacob knew her.
Oh.
Or, you know, Jacob went in unto her.
Oh.
And then Jacob lay with her.
Oh, wow.
I'd be like, oh, I want Jacob to know me.
Did you?
Oh, I wanted Jacob to know me. I
wanted
wanted
Jacob?
to be known.
That man Jacob at that stage.
At that point, I was a confused mess of hormones and chaos.
Okay.
I wanted to be known by
Jacob.
someone, somehow. Because that's what my hormones were telling me to do.
Okay.
Right? So the Bible was like very, very saucy. Lots going on.
I mean, also very violent in places. But
hugely-
yes. Like
hugely
King
violent.
Solomon. I feel like, isn't that the book
Oh,
that
the
always gets
poet.
talked about
Yeah.
as being a bit
Song of Solomon.
passionate? Song of Solomon.
Yeah, which is a lot of his poetry.
Okay.
And it's very racy.
Okay.
Yeah, he talks about women. I mean, he married, if I'm not mistaken, he had like, I don't know how many, hundreds of wives and hundreds of
God.
concubines, which are like girlfriends.
So is
not
it
actual
saucy
wives.
or just a patriarchal fantasy?
Oh, it's a patriarchal fantasy, but for some women, that's
saucy.
that's saucy, you know. So that's basically how I learnt about sex and babies.
Okay, so that's two very different messagings that you had, right? Like I heard
No,
one...
because the Bible was still strict about it, you know. The Bible was still strict about sex before marriage. I mean, fornication, that term, for us anyway, came from the Bible.
Yeah.
And so it was still strict about that. I mean, there were whole verses in the Bible where essentially it was saying, if your daughter has sex outside of marriage, kill her.
Yeah.
Stone her to death.
Yeah.
I mean, even Mary, the mother of Jesus, when she realized that she was with child and it wasn't Joseph because she'd never slept with him, her trying to convince the people around her was difficult. And even Joseph had the conundrum of, like, for me, I've got to stand by this person because I know what the repercussions will be for her if it's found out that she
has fornicated.
She has fornicated and been with child, you know?
Yeah.
So he chose to defend her, but there are other men in the Bible who killed those women, you know?
Okay, but I suppose where I was kind of trying to understand how your experience was, is it sounds like it was like sex and everything else can be pleasurable and nice, but only in the context of marriage. So there's quite an extreme, right? Either it's terrible and dirty and sinful, fornication, or it's a bit racy, you can be laid with by Jacob or whoever, right?
Whoever, yes.
Okay. So I'm going to take a wild guess here. Correct me if I'm wrong. In all those Bible stories, did you see or hear about any gay sex? Because you're obviously a queer person.
Yes, but it was in the context of heathens and pagans and the people who were trying to destroy the Israelites. So these were people who were not good people. That was when you heard about homosexual sex.
Okay. And it was all negative.
It was all negative, you know. I was going to bring up the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is where we get the term sodomy from. But for me, I don't think that's an accurate portrayal. Well, I know that it's not an accurate portrayal because it was about rape. It actually wasn't about homosexual sex. But because it was men raping men, for the people in the church, it became synonymous with just homosexual sex.
Okay.
And then, of course, you've got like Paul in the New Testament telling the churches that he was preaching to that there is a sin of homosexuality. And then there's verses in the Bible about a man laying with a man being against the natural order and so on and so forth. So when you did hear about it, it was always in a negative sense. It was something to be rebuked and cast out.
Okay. So then, I mean, I guess the reason we're talking about sex is because that's the thing that gets you to a baby, right? In this context. So you lay with Jacob and then magically appears a baby.
Absolutely.
How did you make sense of all of those different messages as this crazy hormonal teenager? And at what point did you realize that you didn't want to sleep with Jacob? You wanted to sleep with, I don't know, Josephine? Ruth. Yeah.
Well, I'd always kind of had inklings. I spoke about that in the faith
episode.
and queerness episode. I'd always had inklings that I wasn't straight because of the kind of crushes that I had. And so then it kind of brought up a conundrum. Well, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
And for the longest, it was just put it to one side because there's absolutely no way that that can be a thing in my community and in the church that I was in.
Yeah.
So there was no point even entertaining it.
Okay.
But I knew that I was definitely different.
And you were very aware of you putting it to the side, or it came in and out of your consciousness?
Yeah, it was in and out, but I just knew that I had to put it to one side. I couldn't even fathom that that could be me. So I didn't entertain it.
Yeah.
And I pushed it to one side.
And how long did that go on for?
I'd say 29
Okay.
is what I would say.
And did you know that you wanted to did you want to have kids? Did you want to get married?
I was quite anti-marriage.
Okay.
Because I'd only ever seen the negative side of marriage. The community I grew up in is very patriarchal. It's very, man dominates woman, woman submits to man. I saw a lot of abuses, domestic violence. My mum is divorced. Her stories about my dad were not great. So I just had a very negative portrayal about certainly heterosexual marriage. And so I was very anti-marriage for the longest. And in terms of kids, I kind of vaguely thought it would be nice to have a kid, but because I couldn't see how that would happen, even in the pretense of heterosexuality, I still couldn't see it because I didn't want to get married. But I also didn't want to be a single parent.
Yeah.
Because my mum raised me as a single parent and it was tough and I didn't want to repeat that. So I was kind of caught between a rock and a hard place.
Okay. So when do you feel like it came to a head for you, this like conundrum of like, I can't see myself marrying a man. I don't want to get married. I might want a kid, but I can't see how that happens. Like,
I think it all came to a head in the last church that I was in, that I spoke about in the faith and queerness episode, where I realized that I was at odds and I couldn't avoid the reality of my sexuality anymore. And so I knew that I had to remove myself from that church space. And in essence, my community, because I was either going to marry a man and live a lie and mess up his life and my life and the life of any kids that we had, or I was going to have to suppress who I was and suppress my desires, and both were not palatable for me. So then I had to remove myself. And it was in the removing of myself from that space that I was able to then explore my sexuality, reconcile bits of myself that had been really quite fragmented. And then I met you. And it became really clear to me within, I think, a month that I wanted to marry you and that I wanted to have children. That desire to have kids came flooding back. So it must have always been there, but it came back with such a force when I met you.
Wow. I can definitely relate to elements of that in our meeting, but obviously I had a very different journey to you.
Yeah, tell me about your journey, because they are extremely different.
Extremely different, but then also there's some overlaps, right? I think, like you, I only started to seriously think about kids, well, when I met you, way late, in a meaningful way. In other words, you're the one person that I've had real involved conversations with about potentially having kids, like getting pregnant, for example. But yeah, in terms of our conditioning, I guess my learning about sex and kids was very different. Like, I had a family where you got very negative messaging about not fornicating. I got no messaging at all from my family of origin. Like I got no birds and the bees chat, nothing. Obviously grew up around peers who came from much more religious spaces, and I definitely heard in the culture this don't fornicate thing growing up in Southern Africa. But also I heard I saw lots of very liberal attitudes to sex. And I heard loads of messaging, which was like about anti-HIV and AIDS campaigning. So it was like condomize, and the general culture was like try and protect people because we know everyone's having sex. Mm-hmm. So it was like very mixed messaging in a different way. Mm-hmm. And I would say the main ways I learned about it were I read non-stop as a kid. Like I learned to read really young, like maybe about 4 years old. And I consumed anything from my mum's women's magazines with the Dear Auntie Pitt, you know, my husband does not want to have sex with me. And, you know, it was like you had your agony aunt column, which was always full of sex.
To read that column.
I think it was actually Dear Dolly. And it was in Drum magazine. And I always would find that page. As soon as my mom, I would go to her drawers and I'd be like, yes, dear Dolly. Like I had to find out. I'd read the Agony Aunt columns. I remember being so obsessed with this book called Forever, which was by Judy Blume. It was in her teen fiction.
Legend.
Do you know
Icon.
She was an icon.
I read her.
And it had a gold cover and black writing. And there was definitely teens having first kisses. And I think stuff that definitely insinuated first sexual experiences. Mm-hmm. And I found it like so racy. So there was that. But also I loved reading intellectual books. So one of the books I remember begging my dad to get me at the end of term when I'd got the grades I was supposed to get was this book on reproduction. Mm-hmm. Which was targeted at about 16-year-old kids in their sexual health and reproduction classes or biology classes. And I was definitely under 10. And I remember him being like, I don't know if this book is appropriate for you. And I was like, but you promised me that if I got the grades I was supposed to get, I could get whatever book I wanted to. And he relented. And I read this book. And I read everything about the biological processes of sex. And
what did you learn, young Tam?
I mean, I was horrified. I mean, the main thing I remember taking away was like, I wish I was a man.
Ooh.
I wish I was a man was the main thing.
Yeah.
And it was basically because I did this calculation. So if you were a man, you had a penis and you got erect and you did this act and you, sorry to be graphic, but this is what the book said, you ejaculate.
It's a scientific fact.
It's a scientific fact. And then on you go with your life.
Yep.
And if you were a woman...
Meanwhile... in the land of women.
Yeah, in the land of women, it was like somehow
Hellfire.
Someone, you know, does what they're supposed to do. And now you've got to wait for 9 months while your body changes, stretches in every which direction.
Stretch Armstrong.
Your breasts become engorged and painful. Then you have to go through this painful experience of birth. Then you've got 18 years of looking after this wretched thing.
Well, we know what you think about kids.
No, I mean, but that is how I read it as a kid.
Yeah, of course.
Even then, I mean, I don't think I probably did the 18 years calculation, but I understood what that meant.
Absolutely.
The worst part of it was it didn't matter whether you had the kid or not, because from age 13, roughly, every month you had to bleed, and they made a passing nod to... I don't even think they mentioned pain in it, if I remember. But
the reality is, for some women, a lot of women, periods are extremely painful and they happen like clockwork every month.
And that is my reality. Mm-hmm. And even before knowing that reality, I looked at that book and I was like, this is a raw deal. Mm-hmm. I wish I was a guy.
That is understandable. It's so funny you say that. I do remember going around to an auntie's house and they were showing a TV series, but it's like a documentary about women giving birth, but it was quite graphic. Like you literally saw the women squatting down on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
The baby coming out with blood and stuff and all the stuff that comes out with the baby. And obviously the woman screaming like, and I'm there as a kid just watching. I must have been about 8 or 9 years old. And I remember just crying and crying. I was just like, this is horrible. And then of course, as a kid, you are joining the dots. Well, she she's a woman. I'm going to be a woman. So I'm going to go through this. And this is what my mum went through and my aunties went through. And I remember my auntie and my mum just laughing at me and saying, well, that's what it is.
Really?
Yeah, that is the reality.
It's horrifying.
It was terrifying. It was like something from a horror film.
Yes. And no one speaks about this.
No, they don't speak about it at all. But anyway,
we both digress.
Yeah.
My point was, I learned about sex from these very different sources, and there were very different messages. Despite the fact that I thought it was a raw deal, I don't think I wasn't one of those kids that sat there and pined after getting married or pined after having a child. I was very nurturing by nature, loved animals, loved other people's babies. People always talked about how nurturing I was. It was the childbirth and process and all the bodily functions that I just thought were terrible.
Yeah. If you could have skipped that.
To have kids?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You'd have skipped that. But definitely the having kids part was definitely something that you...
Yeah. And having to...
liked the sound of.
Yeah, maybe raising kids and that kind of thing, yes. And I think the furthest I got vaguely in my mind was like, yeah, I think I wouldn't mind adopting one day.
Okay.
I don't know how I even connected those dots. I think maybe it was just that the public conversation in Botswana, there were so many orphans due to HIV and AIDS that there was almost this constant conversation about adoption happening for different reasons in the context I grew up in. And I think maybe that's how I got there. I don't really know. But I never really thought about what man would I have children with. And I saw myself as heterosexual at that point.
Okay. So I get your conditioning in terms of the way you grew up. So when did you realize or start to think seriously about having kids, maybe settling down and having kids? What was that period like?
So that's a little bit of a complicated question for me. So obviously before I met you, I was actually married. And obviously you know that. Don't look shocked.
Look at me trying to be shocked for the camera. Really?
Really?
A man?
To a man.
A whole man?
A whole man. Yeah, I was married to a man. So
Jerry.
Yeah, that. So I came out of that marriage at about, I think the divorce started initiating around 33 or 34, and I was in my mid-30s by the point I came out of it. So the majority of people who've been married, and I mean, I had been with that partner for 10 years, you would perhaps expect me to come out of that relationship with a child.
Yeah, that would have been I remember when you told me that you'd been in this marriage the relationship for 10 years with a man.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, did you have a kid? Do you have a kid? Or is the kid with the father or something? Like I couldn't. And then you said like...
I think you asked me at one point, do I have kids?
Yeah, because it made sense to me for that to be the case.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why you didn't have kids in that 10-year relationship?
Yes, probably. So it wasn't for lack of bringing up kids. If I have to be completely honest, I wasn't conscious of wanting kids, but I think that as soon as I started asking questions about having kids
with my partner
at the time, it became very apparent to me that the relationship was unsustainable. And it was because we were effectively in a relationship that lacked the intimacy or the things that would require that you would need to have kids.
Okay.
And it was...
So it wasn't physically possible, essentially.
It basically wasn't physically possible. Unless we could figure out a way to resolve that issue, it was not going to be viable.
Did he want kids?
To this day, I can tell you that I do not know the answer to that question. Wow. Because such was the nature of the relationship that every time the issue of kids came up, it became so charged and so polarized that I couldn't get a clear answer. And because I was on the fence about it, and probably because the relationship was fundamentally shaky, every time I raised it, the response that I would get would be, well, why don't you come back and let me know when you've decided if you wanted kids?
So it was put on your shoulders.
Alone, which I don't think is how parenting decisions should be made.
No, it has to be both people.
Exactly.
I think in a healthy relationship, normally you discuss together and family planning, right?
Yeah.
You plan together. Do we want
Ideally.
kids? How many kids do we want to have? When do we want to start? How are we going to raise them? And so on and so forth. That feels like a natural conversation to have.
In an ideal scenario, yes, that would be what that happens. I think the people...
And that's not a judgment on him or anything like that. It just,
Yeah.
That just feels like a natural.
That's normal. That's what you should be able to do. And in fact, it shocked me when I then came out of that relationship and started dating. And then that would be some of the first questions I consistently got asked by men when I was dating. Do you want kids? Do you want family?
Yeah.
Because that's normal. And
so even in the dating stage of that relationship, you hadn't had those discussions at all about kids?
You have to understand that I got into that relationship when I was 23.
Okay.
So
it wasn't on your radar.
It was not on the radar. I was in my early 20s. It just wasn't an issue. And I think I find it interesting that you left the church and came into this sense of your queerness at around the 30 age.
Yes.
Because it's around the age I started to realize because the biological clock is ticking.
It's ticking.
And there's something as a woman that everything about society reminds you.
Absolutely.
And so all of these
People
questions come to a head.
Yeah.
About do you want that?
Yeah.
Are you gonna, why haven't you had it
Where's
yet?
your husband?
Right.
Do you have children?
Yeah.
And
all of them.
All the time.
Yeah. So.
Okay. So that's super interesting, actually, in terms of the fact that in a way, that part of you was a bit stifled in that relationship. Because if you can't discuss it, then...
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I dare say it was stifling for both parties. I don't know, unless you have a vested interest in not discussing it for some reason that I don't know about, which could definitely be the case.
Yeah.
I don't see why anybody would want to be in a relationship where they can't speak freely to each other.
Agreed.
It's not healthy. It's not helpful. Whatever. That's what I think. But, to go back to the thing, I think that we say ideally you family plan. The bottom line is, and this is different for queer couples and heterosexual couples, is there are plenty of people who get knocked up without a plan when they're heterosexual.
That's very true.
That doesn't happen for us.
No.
And I think had I got knocked up in that relationship, I might well have stayed in that relationship for a lot longer. And that's just the bottom line. But as it happened, it didn't happen. And so it was a precursor to me coming out of a marriage that wasn't really providing things that I started to, I think, subconsciously feel strongly about. One thing I would say that I didn't realize is that I probably subconsciously wanted kids, because as soon as I came out of that marriage and separated, I had this inexplicable desire to have a hysterectomy, to remove my womb, which I know is a wild thing to say. But I felt such a deep grief that was like, I'm never going to have kids. I can't see it happening for me now. And that, for some reason, was the extreme way my mind tried to process that reality. It was like a deep grief. And then I started having this experience that at the moment I had, I guess, blown up my life and exited this marriage, my friends were now getting married or already having babies or on their second, in some cases even third children. And so I was looking around at all these people I was close to and seeing this life that felt like something I would never have. And when I'd be going to like a baby shower for a friend and I'd go to H&M Baby or wherever else to get them a gift, I would walk through the aisles and I would just find myself crying. And it was the first time I had any sense that maybe I wanted to be a mother.
Oh, my love.
Yeah. That, and there were a few moments it came up when I was writing my PhD in the same era, because I was always thinking about what is the legacy? What am I passing down to my child? And I was just like, that just might never happen for me.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
My love.
Yeah. This is a lot. We did say this episode would be a lot.
It's a lot. I don't know if this episode is going out. We'll have to really give it a feel on this one, and see. But I can tell that you're feeling. I can tell the depth of your feeling. As you talk about that.
Yeah, it's weird to not be able to have access to your desire to be a mother. Weirdly.
Yes, and then so many of our cultural things, religious things can really weirdly dampen that and disconnect you from it for a whole variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you feeling?
Yeah, it's weird how these things are still so present. But I guess they're important to go over because they're part of how we got here.
Yes.
So where are we now?
Well, yeah, I mean, so we meet, and obviously our meeting is a story for another episode, because that's not what this is about. This is really about our journey with fertility and the process of trying to have a child. And like I said earlier, when we met, I just knew within a month that I wanted to marry you. And I had this overwhelming feeling that you were the person that I wanted to also raise children with. And so then in 2023, I started doing some investigations into that.
Yeah.
Found quite a preeminent fertility organisation in the UK. And we won't mention them because the experience was actually quite harrowing in the end for a whole bunch of reasons that we will talk about. But I went on one of their webinars while you were away in Botswana.
I was in Botswana writing up my PhD at the time, and we had some conversations about,
absolutely,
is this something we'd want to do at the end of the PhD process?
Absolutely.
Right?
So I attended this webinar. The guy who presented it was brilliant, made it really accessible and a real possibility. So I was really excited. I was like, oh, wow, this dream that we have can actually come true, and actually a lot quicker than what I thought. I thought it'd be a really long, drawn out process, probably involving a surrogate. But then I attended the webinar and he started outlining the ways forward. So the process of egg freezing, so that you can have them at a later date. Because one of the things we were thinking about is that obviously we're only newly together, really.
Yeah.
And there were things we had to work out in terms of financially and all sorts
Our
like
dynamic.
living, where we're going to live and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I was like, okay, so egg freezing, number one, brilliant. The other thing was shared parenthood?
Yeah.
Shared parenthood.
Which we hadn't known before that
Never
webinar
heard of it.
Was a thing. So this is basically where if you're in a same-sex couple and you're both assigned female at birth, one partner can carry the baby using the other partner's egg.
Yes. So technically I could have one of my eggs implanted in your womb, and you would give birth to my baby in terms of genetics, but it would also be your baby because you would have nurtured it in your womb and built a connection with the baby.
Yeah.
And that blew my mind because, it's so interesting because I remember when I was younger, weirdly having a bit of that fantasy of what it would be like for someone to have my baby.
Really?
Who was a woman. It was like a vague fantasy. So hearing him talk about it was like the fantasy come to life almost.
Okay.
And so I was so excited. So that was the second option. Then of course there's like the third option of surrogacy, which is where someone else carries your child for you and gives birth to the child and so on. And so I thought, this is great. Let's set up an appointment when you come back, and we'll go in and we'll do all of our tests, because there's a whole series of tests that you have to do before you can even start any one of those journeys.
Yeah, and we were aware of our age.
Absolutely.
And that like fertility declines as you get older and so on and so forth. So I remember you calling me when I was in Botswana, super excited, like, should we do this? And I remember being like, oh, whoa, this is a lot.
It's happening.
And also it was great. And I was like definitely stoked about the shared parenthood thing.
Oh, same.
And I was like...
It's like a dream come true. I've met the person I love. I'd proposed to you at that point. You'd said yes.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, my life actually might fall into place. This is amazing.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a kid with this person. They'll be able to give birth to my baby from my egg it's our baby.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was so full of hope and excitement and joy and like just love. It was so exciting for me.
Yeah, it was. I remember it being, I'll tell you why I was preoccupied. I was like, I have a PhD to write. So I was just like,
Yes.
I do not plan to be a baby making machine just yet. No, but I didn't
And I was like, but let's just map it out.
Let's just map it out. And I was like, okay, we can just go for the tests and at least have a clearer picture.
Exactly.
That's where I was. But then I also, you know me, I'm a planner. So obviously I can't get excited unless I have a Gantt chart saying when the baby will come.
Yes.
So my version of how I realized I was excited was that I spent the next few days using this AI tool to make a little baby. I fed it pictures of you and me.
Oh,
do you remember?
We have to put some of those. We have to put some of those in the show notes.
Yeah, exactly.
Our AI baby.
Our AI baby. That was the thing that killed me because that baby was cute.
That baby was cute.
The mini youths were just adorable. I was like, I want to see mini Aiwans running around.
It was a cheeky little boy, wasn't it?
It was I don't know. I could see them now. They're on my phone.
Yeah.
And then there was mini me's, and then there was ones that looked more like morphs of the two of us.
Yeah.
And they were all so cute.
They really were, with the messed up hands, because AI couldn't do hands back then, which is only like a couple of years ago. But AI moves fast.
They were like boxing glove hands or something.
It was interesting.
Anyway, we were excited. I got my head around, okay, maybe we should start this, which actually ended up being the right thing. And then we came back and we decided to start our process.
Journey. So we went to the clinic on that fateful day. They called our names. We went in and the nurse was there. And I think you went first.
Yeah.
So the test that they do is they check your womb to check how many eggs you've got. And that your womb is healthy, that there's no issues with it, because obviously they've got to do lots of hormonal stuff to do things to make you pregnant, all the things that have to happen, the science.
Yeah.
And so you go up on the table.
Yes.
We
get in the middle without getting into the graphic, gory details of how these tests work. They're quite invasive.
Shoves the
you
thing
go
up,
in, you just want to say awful things. You go in, they, do whatever
it's like
invasive
tests. It's like an ultrasound.
It's an ultrasound.
Scan of your womb, essentially.
Yes. And the woman, who is, I think, black mixed race.
Yes, she was definitely mixed race.
She starts her investigation, her ultrasound, and also is kind of feeling around my womb area. And she was like, can you not feel this lump here? Is there a reason you haven't come in before now? That was her first question. And I was like, I guess I've been feeling a lump. And the truth of the matter is, I'd even mentioned it to you.
Yeah.
I had a lump in my abdomen and I knew it was there. But we had been through a pandemic. So I thought I was just gaining weight. And I had gone and Googled and I was like, oh, visceral fat is this hard fat that builds up in your abdomen. So I thought what I had was aging related and lifestyle related, pandemic related weight gain. But as she went on to investigate, she just starts sighing and huffing and puffing and, going, ugh, and, you really should have come in. I don't know why you haven't come in. And, this is not good.
So now we're both on high alert.
We're on very high alert. And she's like, let me go and get a doctor for a second opinion. She doesn't say what it is at this point. And she was like, I need to go and get a doctor for a second opinion. So we're now sitting there on high alert. It's very obvious whoever the doctor is that she's gone to get for a second opinion doesn't really want to come in, because you hear some sort of kerfuffle outside the door and it takes really long to get them.
Yeah.
And I heard something along the lines like, I trust you.
Yes, I remember that.
Because this person, it turned out, we later found out, was extremely experienced.
Yes.
And then she brought in the doctor, showed him the situation. He did his investigation. He said, yeah, no, that's not good. And then she revealed, okay, you basically have large tumours growing in your womb and you can't have a baby and you're going to need a hysterectomy.
Just like that.
No letting you down gently.
No, not even other options.
It was just like, yeah, no, you can't carry. Done. And you probably going to... And no, she said first, you can't carry. And I said, what do you mean you can't carry? So in my head, at this point, I was still in denial and bargaining. And my thing was, so what do I need to do to address this so I can carry? And she was like, no, you won't carry.
Yeah.
You're probably going to need a hysterectomy.
Yeah.
And that was that.
End of.
And then I just started crying.
Yeah, it was horrible.
On the table. And I'm not really a crier and I did not see this coming.
Horrible.
Horrific. Yeah, it was terrible.
It was bad.
I'm laughing
was
because
so angry.
We were upset. You were just holding my hand, bless you. I'm laughing at only because you just had this totally different experience. We then immediately after I got off the table, you got put on the table. Do you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, I mean, she shoved the thing up, did her investigation. She was just like, oh, you've got loads of eggs and you've got a heart-shaped womb.
She was like, you've got
And I was
1,000 golden eggs. Women don't come in with this many eggs. And then she was like, she did this weird, you're the golden child with the great womb. And also then went, so you're going to be carrying.
Yeah, she just literally decided that I'm going to be carrying. Now, I have always known from young, I ain't carrying shit. I've always known that.
You've always known you do not want to carry a baby.
I've always known that I'm not carrying a baby. So even her saying that kind of got my back up, because I was like, well, you've made an assumption there.
Yeah.
And I don't like the way that you have dealt with my partner, because at the time we were
not yet married.
We were not married. So I was already just like very, had my walls up for her because I'd seen the way that she treated you. And I didn't like this thing that she was doing with me. And that was it. So then we came away from that. And we both it was horrible.
Yeah.
It was one of the worst moments actually of our relationship. We approached it in different ways when we got back home.
Yep.
I went straight to Reddit.
Yeah.
I was like, what happens when people have fibroids? And what are the various ways that you can deal with fibroids? And what are your personal experiences of fibroids? So I just went into a Reddit rabbit hole.
Yeah.
You, on the other hand...
Well, I'm a researcher and I've always been told, including by my therapist, that my main way of dealing with anything traumatic is to intellectualize.
As you do.
So, actually it was similar ways of approaching it in that I just went straight to Instagram and I was like, search fibroids. And of course, fibroids are extremely common.
Absolutely.
They also disproportionately affect Black women. We're 3 times more likely to have them.
Yes.
But the problem is that for some people, when the fibroids are bad, you get really terrible symptoms. Some people can just carry on fine living with them. But in my case, that woman told me you have one that's 10 by 11 centimeters, one that's 4 by 5, and one or 3 by 4.
Yeah.
And one that's 1 by 2 centimeters.
Yeah.
These were the tumors. They, in fact, ended up being way larger than that when I got them removed. But the point was, they were clearly and evidently covering my ovaries. They couldn't see any eggs.
They couldn't see your eggs. They couldn't see your ovaries, full stop.
Yeah. So my first thing was to go to Instagram, which was actually the best thing I did, because on Instagram, what I found were brilliant people like Dawn Heels, who's an advocate for fibroid awareness, another Black woman, brilliant Black woman. And she was out there giving information about her own experiences with fibroids. And I learned definitely within a week that women who have them being told they need a hysterectomy is extremely common.
Okay.
And also so outdated. Very, very few people need a hysterectomy now, even though it was the routine treatment in the past, right? There are many ways you can get treated to remove fibroids, some more invasive, some less. But long and short of it is I found a bunch of people. I also posted to my stories. It turned out tons of Black women in my own network have been going through this thing, never speaking about it. I can't talk about all these stories, but so many of those women inboxed me and said, I went through this. This is what I did. You have to advocate for yourself in the GP surgery. They basically gave me a playbook and a roadmap for navigating this thing.
Yes.
And I was held by Black women during that time and have to this day been held by them. And I had people telling me horrific horror stories, but also just giving me such encouragement and warmth and calling me, people I had worked with decades ago, saying, hey, do you want to talk on the phone? I'll talk you through how to do it. And by the way, the NHS waiting lists, if you have fibroids, are 18 months. And you need to find ways to bypass that. Here's how you can go about it.
It was illuminating. I'd only ever heard about fibroids in the hushed conversations that my mum had with her fellow sisters in the church. So I knew the word, but I didn't know the reality. It was when we went through what we went through that it became a reality that was impacting our life. And for me, I just remember on Reddit, what gave me hope was that so many women said, I had fibroids and now I've got 3 kids.
Oh, wow.
I had fibroids and they were removed successfully and it's like, I never had them. I had fibroids and this, that, and the other, you know? So I was like, okay, so there's definitely a hope there. And I think we came together with both our knowledge, because obviously Reddit's kind of more popular. You don't know those people. It's just people writing about stuff. So we came together, pooled our knowledge, and came up with a plan of action.
Yeah, but I have to say, without you in that moment, I don't think I would have moved through that. I think I would have accepted the hysterectomy story. And the reason why was within hours of being home on Reddit, you were like, it's fine. There's hope. This is not the end. We will find a way.
Oof, I don't even remember that.
You sat me down and you said, I do not accept this. I won't accept it.
That's the Christian in me, you know?
Yeah, I know. And I was
it's like, no.
She's speaking life into me. And I was just like, I had two reactions. One was like, is she just in denial? Is this her version of the trauma? And then another part of me was like, maybe she's right. And then when you started showing me the Reddit threads, that was the thing that gave me the momentum to keep asking and posting on Instagram and finding real accounts. And I couldn't believe the generosity of people.
Fast forward.
Yeah.
You've managed to get your appointment to have surgery to remove the 3 fibroids.
Yeah.
Which by this point have grown. It was like carrying a 4-month-old baby, I think they said.
More than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got your appointment, you go into the hospital to have the surgery. And so then, you know, Dr. Bandari, brilliant guy, comes to you maybe a day later.
Yeah.
And he says, yep, surgery went really well. You can go and start fertility treatment in 3 months. And I'm like, sorry, hold on. How can we even think about having children when we've just dealt with all of this trauma? And
yeah, because we've skipped a lot, right? We got the diagnosis and then there was months of battling to get seen, cancer antigen reads being off the charts, me getting what's called a red referral, an emergency referral to be seen sooner, me having to go and get a whole bunch of private diagnostics. Those are things we'll talk about another time on another episode about the health system and women's health. But it had been a really traumatic time. Then you go into this major surgery. It's extremely invasive.
Very.
And, you know, you're out for 6 weeks. You can't walk for more than like a couple of minutes at the same time to begin with. And the first thing they say is, so when do you want me to make the referral for you to start your treatment?
To start the IVF Planned Parenthood thing. And I was like, guys, my brain can't even compute. I'm just glad that my partner has made it through the surgery healthily.
Yeah.
I think we've had enough womb stuff.
Related things.
Let's just stop, take a breather and gather ourselves in the new year and not even think about that right now.
There were many people, in fact, who do come out of surgery and just cannot wait to be told when they can start trying.
Yeah.
And some of them, it's not their first surgery.
That's the thing.
They've had multiple and they're trying to get pregnant again or for the first time and they knew they had to have a surgery before it. So they're just itching to go.
Absolutely.
And also for many people, they're coming out of surgery, they don't need to go via the IVF route.
Exactly.
Right? They can count on having sex with a partner and it being more likely or naturally available.
To conceive naturally, essentially.
Yeah.
But that it's not possible for us in the sense that we can't naturally conceive.
Yeah.
So we still have to go through those processes.
Yeah.
And it had already been traumatic for us that I think, at least for me, thinking about starting again, it felt like what fresh new trauma awaits us if we actually start this thing. Because the other thing I had found in my Reddit wormhole was that even the process of getting your eggs frozen, the process of stimulating the follicles and then extracting the eggs and so on and so forth is intense and quite traumatic and quite painful.
Yeah.
And so then on top of that, then the actual process of actually having the IVF done and the Planned Parenthood, you know, taking the egg from mine to yours. And I just thought to myself, it feels like that this is only the beginning of the pain that we've experienced as a couple. However, the enduring feeling for me was that the desire was still there.
It sounded like you're about to say is still there.
It is still there.
Yeah.
You know, when I think about our AI babies, and when I think about the way I felt when I met you, none of that feeling of wanting to materialize those children together and raise kids together has really gone away. But for me, the question is, at what cost? Because I saw the cost that we paid just with the fertility checks and then the surgery. So I don't want your life on the line to have kids, because having you is more important than having children.
Oh, that's sweet. I mean, I do want to acknowledge the realities of Black and Black mixed race women going through maternal health systems, but I feel like, at least I hope I'm mostly right in saying, like, I don't think it would be that stark, but in terms of I'll be here or not potentially, but I do think the costs are great financially, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and it's just expensive to have kids. So even if you're successful with that process and you move through all of those things, there are still massive questions about it, right?
Everything changes.
Yeah. And, you know, in a project where we're working together, building stuff, you sort of think, God, what are the adjustments that would have to be done for that alone?
And there's things like me wanting to homeschool the kids, because I largely just don't have great faith in the British education system.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I did not come to this relationship. I mean, definitely had some real concerns about the education system. Absolutely. But I had never really considered homeschooling like that. So that took me a while to get my head around. And although I'm still like, but I also think we have 1,000 things on our plate already. So anyway, that's a practical thing. The bottom line is a question of like, where are we now? And it sounds like you're saying you still have the desire, but you have reservations.
I absolutely do.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think our relationship is more important overall. I don't know that if we didn't have kids that I would be hugely regretting it. It might be like, it would have been nice. Yeah. I did have that desire.
Yeah.
But I think I have made peace with the fact that it might not happen.
Yeah.
And now it's just about processing some of the things I mentioned at the top of the episode, which is just some of the maybe shame and embarrassment. And now coming towards the end of the episode, I still can't articulate why I feel that, but what I do know is that I will have to process that.
Yeah, and I think it's really critical that we do that.
How we do it, I don't know if that's therapy, continuing the conversation between ourselves.
Yeah. What it might be is the end of that vision of parenthood. You know, there are other ways to become a parent. People adopt.
Yes.
People, there are many ways people parent or have a role in the life of children around them.
Yeah. I have a godson. I have 2 goddaughters.
Right.
Who I need to spend more time with, if I'm being honest. But they live in London and I live in Leeds.
Yeah.
So I do try to talk to them on the phone. But yeah, there are other ways to parent. I love mentoring.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but also it would be disingenuous to pretend that's the same thing as the thing that you imagined and we imagined for ourselves. So it really needs processing.
Absolutely.
And
those AI babies are running around.
They are cute. I'm not going to lie. So I don't know. I guess it's, where do we go from here?
Yeah.
We don't know. But what I do want to know is, we started this episode talking about our upbringings.
Yes.
And how it just took us so long to even know that this was a viable path for us as a queer couple.
Yeah.
So now, with everything that you know and everything that we've been through, is there anything you would do differently? Is there anything you wish you could tell younger you, or you would want to tell a younger version of you who's coming up now, in terms of words of wisdom?
It's difficult because the conditioning was so strong. But I guess I would say leave the church community sooner rather than later. Don't get sucked back in. Come out sooner. Even though it's hard, come out sooner. But then again, if I had, maybe I wouldn't have met you. That's the thing.
Yeah, but also we do what we do when we're ready.
That's very true.
You know what I mean?
That's very true.
And to push someone into something before they're ready is violent. Like, it's just we get there when we can, and when we are resourced to, or have hit such a low ebb that we have no choice.
Yeah, I think there's this big contrast in that things have changed for that younger generation, and I think if I hadn't had that knowledge and that confidence and being out at that age, maybe I would have frozen my eggs sooner, etc. So that when it came to this, we'd have more options.
Yeah.
We don't have as many options now as a result of the delay that happens when you grow up in the kind of families and churches that at least I grew up in, which delays you by about a decade from other people who are heterosexual, for example. And that delay is quite big when you think about it in terms of biological clock.
Yeah. Massive. Yeah. Massive. Yeah.
So that's the sadness that I have, but also the gratitude I have is to see that next generation armed with that knowledge and taking their ownership and agency and taking those first steps to do what they can at an age where it really makes a big difference.
Yeah, and knowing there are people who are campaigning and advocating for, you know, same-sex couples to basically receive their IVF on the NHS in the same way that heterosexual couples which is still not, you know, consistent across the board.
Exactly.
So things hopefully will be different for the next generation. And I think I have the same. I wish I had known about egg freezing.
Yeah, same.
You know,
I really do wish I'd known about that. That wasn't even a concept. For me.
And even if I had, I probably would have had my fibroids found sooner. I wouldn't have needed such major surgery. Or if I did, I'd have had time to recover from it, which would give me time to mentally and emotionally process it in a way that may mean I felt more able and resourced to go on the journey that I feel like I've just now parked for us to return to.
Yeah. But we are here.
Yeah.
I'm grateful for the lessons that we've learned, the people that we've met who've really held us and encouraged us. I'm grateful that we've made it through, particularly you made it through, relatively unscathed in terms of your physical health. You're still here with me. We're still together. And life goes on.
It does. And I'm just grateful I had you looking after me when I had to go through surgery. I just don't know what I would have done without you, honestly. You were incredible as a partner, and you still are. And that's the bit where I think, yep, I'm with my person, because whether we have them or not, or whether we reopen this conversation now or in some time ahead, I know I have someone who I can go through those ups and downs with and still be here and still love you.
Yeah. I love you too.
Love you too.
Woo, that was a tough one.
Intense.
But yeah, that was a tough one. And I do hope this episode goes out. And just in case it does, as always, if you want to reach out to us, ask us a question, give us feedback, share your own story, you can contact us at rigorandflow@gmail.com. That's rigor, RIGOUR, because we're British, ANDFLOW@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah. We sure would.
And we'll answer your questions in a subsequent episode. I think
that's us.
I think that's it. Oh, and everything, the people that we spoke about in this episode, we'll link to them in the show notes or in the show description if you're watching this on YouTube.
Yes, ma'am.